Hi everyone. So as we mentioned last week, we're going to spend the next couple weeks looking at the Google Visualizations library and exploring some of the different ways that we have to get data into this, as well as looking at, we'll look at some basic mapping techniques next week. But for this week, what we wanted to do is look at a different method of getting data into our Google visualization. So the way we looked at last week was we downloaded a JSON file from in this case, the Fred API. And then we applied some logic to it. We pulled it in. We used our AJAX GET request to pull it into our JavaScript file. We used a little bit of logic to rearrange the data so that it was in the format that the Google Visualization Library likes. And then we were able to render out our chart. This week, what we're going to do is look at the same thing in a sense. We're going to be using Google Visualizations again, but we are going to be looking at a different way of getting the data into it. Now, the thing about doing the API download is that it can actually be very straightforward, right? You can just actually keep that URL. Every time you hit that URL, you'll get the data back, and you can save that file. You can save a copy of that file on your computer, upload it to your website, and voila, your data is updated. And that works very well when you have an API to drive your data. Now that's not always the case. Very often there's data that we want to use that is being collected by hand or curated somehow. We don't have this convenient API that we can use to do it. And in those cases, it's really important to have a method for updating the data that doesn't require you as the programmer to be the one to do it, right? Obviously, you might build many projects, and you can't always be the one who has to do the data updating. It has to be something that others can do. So while we're still going to use data that we know we could get through an API, we're going to see how we can do this using basically something that looks like a spreadsheet. It's actually a Google Fusion table, and we're going to use an API to the Google Fusion table as a means to get the data into our chart. So I'm going to start here. I am at the civilian unemployment rate, something we've seen before, I believe. And we're going to go ahead and download this. I'm going to download it as a comma separated value file. And I'm just going to go ahead and start a new folder here on my desktop. I'm going to call this gviz fusion source. Obviously you can use any name that you like, and I'm going to save my data file in there. Now the next step is for me in this case, the way I'm going to approach it, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create the Fusion table. The Fusion table, which is basically a spreadsheet. So I'm going to go to my Google account. And as you can see at this point, I don't have anything in it. Now, if you don't already have Fusion tables enabled, if you've never used them before, when you hit the Create button in your Google account, you're going to need to choose Connect More Apps, and you'll get a screen once it comes up that looks like this. And you'll just need to scroll through until you find Fusion tables, and you can add them to Drive. And that's how you'll get this option coming up. So once you've done that, then you can choose Fusion tables, and you can see it says that it's still experimental. And you'll notice an interface that looks very much like what happens when you create an Excel spreadsheet or something. You have this option to sort of pull data in, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to choose Browse. I'll choose the data file that I just created, and it does a nice estimation here. It says I think this is comma separated. I'm going to click Next. Obviously, if I knew it wasn't comma separated, I would choose something else. And you can see it's pretty straightforward. I have here my date and my value, something that we are familiar with. Now, this is, you guys know that we are extremely emphatic about the documentation of your code. We also feel that it's very important that you document your data. So the great thing about this is, about Fusion tables, is that it actually really does a good job of reminding you of the kind of things that you should remember. So in this case, I know that I got this from the Federal Reserve Economic Database, so I would use that. And of course I can go ahead, and I would strongly recommend, and particularly if you find yourself using census data for anything, link directly to the table. If you've done some refinements in search results on the census, on the fact finder, make sure that you link directly to those results, because in the end, because otherwise it can be very difficult to remember exactly how you got there. So use the fact that this has a link. I'm going to call this civilian unemployment, and I think that this is okay. Obtained from Fred at the link above. I've always enjoyed this prompt, which says, for example, what would you like to remember about this table in a year? I'm going to say percent here. Okay, so this is another case. I mean, we've sort of seen this when you guys are looking at naming your repos, when you're naming your files, when you're naming your folders. You do want to develop a system for yourself. As you go into newsrooms, you'll become familiar probably with a slug system. It's a good idea to have a slug system. If you're working in a team, you want to agree on a slug system together. Very often it will have some kind of date in it. So I might say, I might put the date like 03, 02, 14, right? And that we would know as a team, as a group, that the naming convention was sort of, month, day, year. So I'm going to click finish here. And again, the interface that you see for this should be very familiar looking to any of you. I mean, I think most of you have used Excel or a spreadsheet system. Now, a couple of things about Google Fusion tables that are unusual. It only shows you 100 rows at a time. You can see I sort of have these little arrow options through which I can navigate it. Fusion tables is not a place where you want to do data editing. Okay, you want to do a little bit like we saw last week. When you're looking at units, you don't want to try to be doing data editing in something, in your code or in your Google visualization. You want to make sure that you kind of have things in the format that you want them. So the same thing goes here. Obviously, we just sort of downloaded and uploaded this one, but particularly if you're curating your own data set, you want to make sure that you've done the manipulations. This is not a very friendly environment in which to do that. It's online, it's slow, it's just not very efficient. So I have my data source set up now. We'll look in a minute at how we can actually extract data from this. But before that, I actually need to get my, I need to get all my files ready. And so here is my folder. Now, here's the thing. As we touched on last week, very much the process that we use, this sort of set of files that we have created in the past, or sort of up till now, where we're pulling in our JSON data, our index and our scripts. These are things that actually we're going to use over and over and over again. So to that end, I can actually just make a copy of these. I can paste them into my new folder. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. So I'm going to move that to trash, and then we will paste the items. And what I'm going to do is actually just look at these, and I might tweak them a little bit in order to modify them for this particular data set, for this particular data source. But for the most part, once I have a file set like this working, I can basically reuse it over and over and over again. Because as we noted last time, right, so there's my window, there's my index. Oops, I have this accidentally open from other things. Okay, so this is the index that I just copied into this new folder. And of course, we would be also creating our repo and doing all that good stuff, right? So I have this all set up now. Now, I don't want to be trying to load my JSON data because I haven't actually put that in there, but I can still see. I do just want to remind you all that one of the things we touched on very briefly last week was the fact that what manipulates the type of chart that we're using is actually this, whether it says line chart or bar chart, right? If you recall at the end of class, I was able to just switch this to bar chart and come out with a completely different looking chart based off of the same data. So because of that, that means that once we have data inside, inside our file, this system that we're using of, we need to get to document ready, we do that, we load the Google Visualizations library here. Once the Google Visualizations library is loaded, then we are going to somehow obtain our data. But because I've set all of this up in advance, and I have kind of generic names on my scripts, I can literally just copy and paste these files into a new project even if I need to do a different format of visualization. Hopefully you guys have been able to follow along sort of setting all of that up, and we're going to come back in a minute and look at the way that we get data out of our Google Fusion table, and the formatting that we need to do in order to use it as a data source, just the way we'd use our JSON file from the Fred API. So we'll see you back here in just a moment.